Welcome back to Oncology for the Inquisitive Mind, Colorectal Cancer Edition. We are continuing our sojourn through colorectal cancer, and in this introduction, I am basically hitting all of the Oncology for the Inquisitive Mind cliches and bullet points. And what bigger cliche than my broadcasting partner, Josh Hurwitz. Josh, you are looking very spiffy with your new headphones and your horn rim glasses. You look like someone who's walked out of Hogwarts.
Thank you, I think. Look, I'm Harry. I've always wanted like Hermione's, time turner, so I could just do more things in a day. But that's if we're talking about things we want in life. Or can we change the title of our podcast to Oncology for the Inquisitive Vibes, Gryffindor edition?
Yes, we were talking about this off air. Is it off air? I don't know. But it's, yes, targeting an audience that is younger than both of us. But today we're going to, as I said, we're continuing on our colorectal cancer expedition, our expedition into the great unknown, the great depths, some might say. And the theme of the next couple of episodes, and I guess this whole series as a whole, is colorectal cancer, much like breast cancer, much like lung cancer, has always had biomarkers. And, things that guide prognosis. The difference historically has been that we haven't really had much that we can do about it.
Success.
Success. 10 years ago, you say someone has dMMR metastatic colorectal cancer, which is what we're talking about today, and everyone would sort of say, oh yeah, that's cool. That's something. And then not have anything to do about it. But Josh...
Give some oxaliplatin. And then move
probably.
on.
It's 5. Give 5FU. Just 5FU and move on, exactly.
In the water.
But Josh, all of those Baxter pumps just draining into the sewers, forming, colorectal cancer resistant crocodiles and alligators in the sewers. But we are...
Doing well.
We're doing well. But nowadays... Josh, as you will start, that has significantly changed.
I know, it was a bit of a slow start, but that's okay. I like the 5FU resistant crocodile idea. We can make something out of that later on. So I'm going to talk about...
That's the next great expanded universe, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Our Oncology for the Inquisitive Mind, like MCU equivalent.
Yes.
So pembrolizumab, Keynote 177, Michael, it is the pretty standard, let's add some immunotherapy into the MSI high dMMR cohort of those with advanced colorectal cancer. In this case, the immunotherapy agent of choice is pembrolizumab, Keytruda, tried and tested across the universe. The background, as Michael so eloquently said, but I'm going to cover a little bit of statistics here because stats is life, is that look, people are going to disagree with me. It's like they've said in this published study that chemotherapy regimens are uniform in colorectal cancer. This is not me writing it. This was in the published article.
Yes, but that is a mouth into which you have put your foot in.
I know. Look,
multiple episodes, and no, I will not stop mentioning that.
But look, fluorouracil is the backbone. You're going to do that, and in Australia, you're going to start with Volvox plus or minus something else. So look, yes, that is some uniformity, but there is a subgroup here which, as Michael so nicely put, has not really had much success. So those with deficiency and mismatch repair mechanisms represent about 15% of those with colorectal cancer. 12% of those are sporadic and 3% are hereditary. The sporadic are usually due to methylation of the MLH1 gene promoter. That's about 80% of those. And 70% of the hereditary cases are due to germline mutations in the MLH1 and MSH2. You're looking me confused, Michael. No?
No, that's just my standard face. I always look confused, slightly bemused.
So realistically, what is it? It's an inability of the cell to recognize and repair spontaneous mutations, causing high tumor burden and altered MSI sequences. The PD-1 blockade has emerged as this highly efficacious therapy for patients with MSI high dMMR metastatic colorectal cancer. Ooh. So Pembro and nivolumab have shown durable responses in some patients in this cohort, and it's been approved. But this trial is looking at PD-L1 pembrolizumab versus the standard of care chemotherapy in this cohort. It's a phase 3 trial. So Keynote 177, NCT something, something, something. It was a design of those with locally advanced cancer with this cohort of patients with measurable disease, previously untreated. So this is like, untapped territory, randomized to pembrolizumab or your chemotherapy, not standard of care. It's not regimen. Sure, Michael. I'm just being mean now.
I'm not saying anything.
I know, he's just looking at me. Check that out on YouTube. He's got that look. Metastatic FOLFOX or FOLFIRI every 2 weeks, plus or minus bevacizumab or cetuximab Q2 weekly. If you want to understand the difference between bevacizumab and cetuximab, when to use it, check out our previous episode, and that will give you the answer. There was also optional crossover to pembrolizumab for up to 35 cycles in those who had disease progression whilst on this treatment. They continued on pembrolizumab until unacceptable toxicity, disease progression, or withdrew consent. And the dual primary endpoints, because we're dueling here, is progression-free survival and overall survival. Our secondary endpoint, safety. Our exploratory endpoints were duration of response by blind and independent clinical review. This is great. So median time from randomization to data cutoff, 73 months. I love a long trial. Makes me happy. And that ranges up to 89 months. Michael, you're right. Yeah, right. Let's just get.
It's just that it's always good to know what makes you happy. And
what floats my boat.
What floats your boat is apparently a long trial.
Does. That is literally makes me very happy. So the results.
Man of small interests, easily amused is John.
Small interest. Thank you, Michael. Wow. So there were 850 patients were screened, and of that cohort, about 150 went to the pembrolizumab arm, 154 to the chemotherapy arm. Mostly in their 60s. 68% of patients had sort of right-sided tumors, 50% had a new diagnosis of colorectal cancer, and 25% had a BRAF mutation across the board. The primary endpoint, the progression-free survival, was 16.5 months in the pembrolizumab arm and 8.2 months in the chemotherapy arm. I should just go get a coffee now. Hazard ratio of 0.6. The next point was who's alive at the 12 and 24 month interval. Also pretty important. So 55% and 48% respectively versus 37% and 18% favoring pembrolizumab, which is those first two numbers. So you can say almost half of your patients on pembrolizumab are alive at 2 years. That is good. This is first line, right? So also good.
Much better than giving chemotherapy.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to imply here. The radiographic response, objective overall response was 43% versus 33%, favoring pembrolizumab, and complete response was almost tripled, 11% versus 4%. The duration of response, so 83% of the pembrolizumab arm had an ongoing response versus 35% of chemotherapy at 24 months. Also great. Overall survival was still evolving at the first analysis. So this is a little bit like, let's get this next chapter, this next ASCO plenary. Come on, guys. Safety, before I get to the update, which I hopefully have put in this because Michael, I did this a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, good to know. Michael's seen my notes. 55% in the pembro and 78% had tox. So again, pembrolizumab favored in this. Interesting though, 40% of the pembrolizumab arm and 12% of the chemo arm discontinued due to an adverse event. So despite pembro having fewer tox, more people discontinued it. Grade 5 events was 4% in the pembro and 5% in the chemo arm. So people did die on this trial. I guess the thing is, was it due to something else as opposed to the treatment itself? Michael, because we are trying to do something on YouTube, I should probably share my beautiful slides which I made.
Please do. And while you're doing that, I do also want to point out that this trial did come out in the mythical pre-COVID time. And so immunotherapy was still a bit of a new kid on the block. and we probably weren't as good at, or didn't have as much knowledge in terms of re-challenging immunotherapy and managing side effects, and so that could also contribute to the higher rates of discontinuation in the immunotherapy arm.
Oh, 100%. This was at least, I think, 2017, 2016, because data cutoff was 2023. So as you can see in the slide here, which I so eloquently got from the Keynote 177 Google search.
That's eloquent, is it?
Yeah, it is, right. So this is just the study design, but that's not what we're interested in. We're looking at that progression-free survival curve, and you can see you can drive a truck between that Kaplan-Meier curve. And it's a decent-sized semi-trailer. It's probably got a couple of Toyotas on the back, maybe a Volvo, whatever floats your boat. Moving to the next analysis, which
this
is...
episode brought to you by Toyota and Volvo.
Now, mate, give me a Land Cruiser any day. Maybe a hybrid so people don't get annoyed at me. This is just the
I've done it. I've successly broken it.
You broke me today. But you can see the sub-analysis here, the forest plot, and you can see lots of things sort of favor the pembrolizumab arm. There's a couple that were sort of not statistically significant, like the KRAS mutant cohort, but that was a pretty small cohort as well. And interestingly, left-sided, but also smaller cohort as well. That was just something to really share. It's a pretty small slide deck today. I think, they're sort of pretty well rehearsed. But then we want to move to the final point before I let Michael talk, which is a 5-year follow-up. So where we've got, that's all the initial analysis. This is a 5-year. So what they found is that the median progression-free survival was still double. So it was 16.5 versus 8.2 months, a hazard ratio of 0.60. So it's pretty indisputable that this is a good drug. Then the 5-year overall survival rates were 55 versus 44%. So despite high crossover, about 62% of patients crossed over. So that's a high crossover. The median overall survival was still improved with 77 months versus 36 months and a hazard ratio of 0.73. And it just snuck into that confidence interval of less than 1. Better tolerated. That's what we want for everything, is to have a better drug that's got less toxicity. And yes, it's expensive, but it's all going to come off patent soon. So we'll have lots of fun trials of Pembro, I assume, in the next 5 or so years. And Michael, I think that's the end of my presentation.
Yeah, a really good trial, and so eloquently enunciated, because apparently we're throwing that word around. But no, it's really good because as you say, it is a slam dunk trial. There's really no downside to giving immunotherapy in the first line, and if you don't give immunotherapy in the first line for this cohort of patients, it's we don't like to use very strong language on
here, or not online, not on air,
not on air, but it is indefensible. I don't think there's anyone who would say otherwise. But
Michael, I have a segue. I got to do my segue.
All right, so go do your segue.
Thank you. Like any good trial in life, there is always something that's going to checkmate that trial and potentially change the game once again. So, Michael, I think you're doing a checkmate trial. So why don't you tell us what it's about?
Not your best segue there, Josh.
Not bad.
I think you've had better, but yes, you are.
Maybe I
correct.
should check how I do segues.
Yes, you should check how you do segues, mate. Betraying our nationality there. But yes, you're right. I am doing a checkmate trial, specifically the checkmate 8HW, because this is in the era of checkmate trials where they've run out of numbers, and so they're starting to throw letters into the mix as well. And this is a very interesting trial because just as Keynote is a pembrolizumab trial, checkmate, they're a series of checkmate products. They're all ipi-nivo trials. And it is a very good trial. It's actually probably closer to 2 trials in one. And so there will be a bit of back and forth in this discussion. And so if I lose you, apologies. Background is the same as Josh, although it is interesting that the numbers or the incidence of dMMR or MSI high colorectal cancer is actually lower than that was quoted in the Keynote 177 trial. So in Keynote, as Josh said so eloquently, it was about 15%. Checkmate quotes about 4 to 7% in metastatic colorectal cancer. And there's a bit of a shot across the bow in the the publication against Keynote 177. So yes, they acknowledge that PFS was longer with pembrolizumab than chemotherapy. I suspect this was before the overall survival data came out. But then they go on to say that 29% of patients in that study had progressive disease as a best overall response, and less than half were alive and free of progression at 2 years of follow-up. Ooh, Dems fighting words.
I mean, just slightly, but I think you have to compare it to what they were comparing it to, right? And anyway.
Oh, I completely agree. I just think it's funny that this is an academic paper that is overtly taking shots at another study.
I mean, why don't they do it versus the standard of care of pembro? Then would have some fun.
Well, you say that, and this is why I actually quite like this trial, because you look at it and you think, this is just going to be another trial where they do it against chemotherapy. It's the sunitinib problem that we've spoken about many times on this show. And you are right to a degree. So as I said, checkmate.
I'm always right to a degree.
Yeah, a moderate success, as some might say. But Checkmate AHW is a 3-arm study, and it's best to think about it, though, as a split between 2 arms, because these 3-arm studies, like a lot of other Checkmate studies, they do different comparisons. So it's a comparison of ipi-nivo and nivo alone with chemotherapy. And you would think, based on some of the other data, that the comparisons would be ipi-nivo and chemotherapy and nivo with chemotherapy. As you can see through the pattern here, I'm completely having a mental blank as to what this diagram is called. But hey, we're allowed to have mental blanks. It just means that my one brain cell has momentarily stopped working. But as you can see, patients were randomized to ipi-nivo and then standard of care chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy was dealer's choice. So it was FOLFOX, FOLFIRI, or FOLFOXIRI, and patients were also allowed to have biological agents as well. Patients who were enrolled had unresectable or metastatic colorectal cancer that was centrally confirmed as MSI high or dMMR. Maximum of 1 line of therapy was allowed in this cohort, the IO plus chemo or IO versus chemo. There were also arms that received 2 lines of therapy, and they were assigned 1-to-1 to ipi-nivo or nivo. No patient was allowed to have previous IO. It's all quite confusing. The endpoints overall, the dual primary endpoints were the PFS in nivo ipi versus chemo in previously untreated patients, and PFS in ipi-nivo versus nivo. And this is where it gets interesting. Ipi-nivo versus nivo in patients regardless of previous systemic treatment. And they do narrow down on the more, I guess, relevant cohort in this study, which is the first-line patients, because again, as we said, you are not going to give immunotherapy in dMMR colorectal cancer patients in anything other than the first line. It just doesn't really make sense. Key secondary endpoints were overall survival, progression-free survival in the intention to treat population, and overall response rate. And they also had exploratory endpoints, which were safety and health-related quality of life. Now, I will very quickly. Oh, there you are. How about that? I thought about this already. This second diagram does demonstrate the comparison between ipi-nivo and nivo as well. So it is quite confusing, but if you think of it as ipi-nivo versus chemo as one study and ipi-nivo versus nivo as a second study, it's probably a bit easier to digest. Same way you eat a whale one bite at a time. So I will say that the ipi-nivo versus chemo.
Michael,
Josh is going to chime
eat a
in.
whale? What was that?
Eat a whale, eat an elephant, eat something big. I don't know. Eat a house, eat a wall. You eat it one bite at a time, Josh.
What about a burger? Like, just go to just
yeah,
keep
but eating a burger isn't that great of an accomplishment, you see.
Eating a whale, like, it's not really something you stick on your plate. Either way, Michael, I'm going to ruin the end of this if you don't sort of keep going. I'm just going to be like, so tell me exactly. You keep going.
We'll go very deep into how one would consume an entire whale, and that would be the deviation and sidetrack of all sidetracks. So, as I was going to say before Josh jumped in about eating whales, I think that the ipi-nivo versus chemo data, which I've got here, is not that interesting. And yes, Josh was talking about driving a patented Toyota Land Cruiser through his arms. Well, this you can drive a patented Isuzu semi-trailer because they're very, very wide. The PFS at 12 months was 79% in ipi-nivo versus 21% with chemo. The PFS at 24 months, 72% versus 14%. And the median PFS with ipi-nivo was not reached, compared with 5.9 months. So huge, huge difference, as you can see. What I think is actually far more interesting is this. And for those of you who are listening, what I am showing here is the ipi-nivo versus nivo data, because this is exactly what Josh was saying. He preempted with his snide little comment about comparing doublet immunotherapy with single immunotherapy. And he's leaning forward again.
Now I'm leaning forward. I'm so sorry. Should I just lie back and not look at the microphone? Hello, microphone. I mean, what was I going to say? This was a lead-in for you. So everyone will now remember that this specific trial it's explained so incredibly well by the one and only
eloquently,
doctor.
Some might say.
Oh, eloquently. That's the word of the day. By Dr. Michael Rodriguez Fernando. Your Checkmate 8HW analysis will go down in history as the best episode you and I have ever done.
It'll certainly go down as an analysis of Checkmate 8HW, one of many probably.
Yeah.
But yes, so this is I think a major feather in 8HW's cap, is that they overcame, or they fixed, the problem that we have labeled on this show, the sunitinib problem, where, in renal cell cancer or in hepatocellular cancer, where the control arm is outmoded by the time the study is published. And so this is actually where it gets interesting, because we always ask, CTLA-4 has its toxicities. It has diarrhea. It has increased risk of hyper and hypothyroidism and hormone axis issues. How much benefit does it actually add to PD-1, PD-L1 blockade? And now we can actually say there is a significant benefit. The PFS of ipi-nivo versus nivo was not reached, compared to 39.3 months, with a hazard ratio of 0.62 and a p-value of 0.0003. So that's very statistically significant. In the first-line population, and this is, again, where it is applicable, the data is applicable to our everyday practice, the PFS was not reached, compared to 60.8 months, with a hazard ratio of 0.69. Now, even though the p-value was 0.04, they had set the p-value border of statistical significance as less than 0.0383. Don't ask me how they came with that number, but that's what they did. And so technically this is not statistically significant. The overall response rate was 71 compared to 58%. Interestingly, ipi-nivo versus nivo, similar rates of complete response, 30 versus 28%. And in the first-line population, the benefit, or the magnitude of benefit, was slightly reduced, 73 versus 61%, and again, similar rates of CR. The duration of response was not reached in both groups. And the other thing that we always think about, as I mentioned before, with ipi-nivo is safety. Again, interestingly, they were fairly similar, 81 versus 71% rate of AEs of any grade. Serious adverse events, 18 versus 8%, and that's probably where you're getting the difference with the ipi-nivo. There was more common with thyroid axis abnormalities with ipi-nivo, adrenal insufficiency, and hypophysitis. Now, across all therapy lines, there was overall survival data with a hazard ratio of 0.61, ipi-nivo versus nivo. And I think that's pretty much all there is to say. So some statistical quirks aside, this is a very interesting study. And I think that it is unfortunately a bit muddy. It's a bit untidy because they've combined people getting immunotherapy at different stages of their diagnosis, different stages of their treatment. But it does raise a very good question. Would you give ipi-nivo in the first line? In Australia, huge momentous news, and I think we're thinking about doing a series on this as well, this and potentially Pembro, the consequences of this, the approvals in our pharmaceutical benefits scheme are being broadened significantly. So you can do ipi-nivo in the first line setting. But
in almost any cancer.
In almost any cancer, and that's opening a whole can of worms, and I'm sure we'll go into that in great detail. But in this particular case, in colorectal cancer, the question, of course, is would you? And I think we always have to fall back on patient selection. You're not going to give this to the 90-year-old with dMMR colorectal cancer.
No.
But you could give it to someone who, I mean, Josh mentioned hereditary inheritance with Lynch syndrome. You could give it to that proportion.
Well, they'd also be
They're
younger, wouldn't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They'd usually be younger. Or someone who's otherwise fit and doesn't have any comorbidities. It's not as clear as one would like, but I think just because they're taking all of these populations, various levels of treatment, and sort of mashing them together and saying, hey, there's a difference. But when they've drilled down into the first line setting, ipi-nivo versus nivo, it didn't quite meet their own barriers for statistical significance. But I think it is still a very attractive option.
100%. And one other thing I would like to add to your incredible trial, Michael, not that you designed it, but you did talk about it very nicely.
It was all me. Many late nights and hard drinking.
That's it. You and drinking, sure. PFS2 data, which is interesting for the Checkmate 8HW. So there was an update, I think, late last year, which said of the 286 patients, there was 29% in the nivolumab alone study received subsequent therapy, which is immunotherapy, therapy, platinum compounds, as did 18% of the ipi-nivo. Overall, the analysis found PFS2 favored ipi-nivo with a 43% reduction in the risk of death, which you already mentioned, after subsequent therapy. So hazard ratio is 0.57. Median PFS2 was not reached in either arm, which is actually great. It was an emerging sort of endpoint, PFS2, and I feel it's sort of become a bit quiet again, but I quite like it as how long can you stay on this first line therapy with good quality of life? Exactly.
But also it's critical for sequencing as well.
Exactly.
Because if the PFS is greater on say an immunotherapy versus a control arm, but then the PFS2 is exactly the same, well, the sequencing probably doesn't matter, because what benefit you're getting in the first line,
you're not getting anything in the second.
You're not getting anything in the second, and then the patients who are getting benefit in the second line are, for want of a better word, catching up. Of course, that doesn't help the people who've died along the way. So that's one reason always to put your best foot first. But exactly. An interesting study, and the long and the short of it is that you can't go wrong with either pembro or nivo. Just follow your local guidelines. Ipi-nivo, I think, is more of a patient selection discussion and a discussion with the patient themselves, as we always say.
That's it. Well, Michael, what are we doing next week? I believe we're still in the colorectal world, which you love.
I do, and we are. So the next group of patients in colorectal cancer that we haven't really talked about that much is the patients with targetable mutations. Again, something that historically we've known about for a long time but haven't had much success in targeting. So we will be talking about a study that targets KRAS, which is probably one of the most common alterations at a molecular level in colorectal cancer, and we'll be talking about BRAF, which is probably one of the worst molecular mutations to have as a colorectal cancer patient.
Well,
but
great.
The space is changing, and we hope you will join us on that very exciting journey next time.
And Michael, don't forget we should do a HER2 episode as well. Either way, see you next week.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Oncology for the Inquisitive Mind, produced by ADC Productions with the assistance of education grants from Pfizer and Merck Pharmaceuticals. As always, these companies do not receive early previews or editorial input of any kind. The opinions expressed in this episode are our own, and the facts are, well, the facts. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing to be among the first to hear our latest forays into the ever-changing world of medical oncology. You can find previous episodes of our show, including coverage of major conferences, interviews with world-renowned experts, and much more at inquisitiveonc.com. If you would like a particular subject covered on the show, drop us a line at inquisitiveonc@gmail.com. And if you happen to be in Australia, stay tuned for details about exciting in-person events we have planned for the near future. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to demystifying oncology again next time.